I cut her brake line. Those 4 words didn't just echo in my garage that night, they set my entire life on fire. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. The people who were supposed to protect me, my husband and my stepson, were plotting to end my life. They wanted my death to look like an accident, all for money, my life insurance, and they didn't even try to hide it. That's the reality I woke up to, the one I had to face head on, silently, carefully, and with a mind racing to survive. A few days earlier, I nearly died on our staircase. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray Ohio winter day where the light never quite fills the house. I was carrying a basket of folded laundry upstairs, Evan's shirts on top, the ones I'd ironed because he said wrinkles made him look cheap. Halfway up, my foot slid. There was no loose sock, no spill, nothing accidental about it. The carpet runner had been shifted just enough, the edge curled like a waiting mouth. I remember the sound more than the pain. The crack of my shoulder against the wall, the hollow thud as my body hit step after step. I remember thinking, very clearly, this is how people die without anyone ever knowing why. When I finally stopped moving, I lay there staring at the banister, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My hip screamed, my wrist burned. I called my husband's name. I called Evan's. It took them far too long to appear. My husband stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, annoyance written all over his face. "What were you doing?" he snapped. "Not are you okay? Not let me help you. I've told you 100 times to be careful. You're always in a rush, always making a mess." I started to cry, not loudly, just the quiet, humiliating kind. "I fell," I said. "I think something moved." Evan leaned against the wall behind him, grinning. Actually grinning. "You didn't fall," he said. "You're just old. This is what happens when people your age don't know their limits." My husband sighed like I had inconvenienced him. "Get up," he said. "I'm not carrying you. If you're hurt, that's on you." No comfort. No concern. Only blame. That night, lying in bed with ice packs taped to my body, I understood something I had been refusing to name. My pain amused Evan, and my suffering irritated my husband. That realization hurt more than the bruises, and it broke something inside me that had been holding on far too long. I remembered the years I had given them. The meals cooked when money was tight, the medical bills I paid for Evan when his own mother disappeared, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, pretending not to notice the smell of alcohol or the lies that came so easily to his mouth. I remembered defending him when my friends warned me, choosing peace over truth, sacrifice over dignity. I cried that night not because of the fall, but because I finally saw how little my life was worth to the people I had protected. So when I stood in the garage days later, holding that warm bag of fried chicken, hoping foolishly for one normal evening, I was already fragile, already bruised inside and out. That's when I heard Evan's voice, low and steady, coming from the shadows. I cut her brake line. The world narrowed to a single point. My fingers tightened around the bag until grease soaked through and burned my palm. I didn't move. I barely breathed. "It's done," Evan continued, like he was discussing a chore. "She won't make it to Monday." I waited, God help me. I waited for my husband to react, to shout, to stop him, to say my name. Instead, there was silence. Then my husband spoke, calm and measured. "You're sure?" That question destroyed any doubt I had left. Not, "Why would you do this?" Not, "Stop right now." Just, "You're sure?" That was the moment I understood the staircase hadn't been an accident. It had been a rehearsal. I backed away without a sound, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and cleansing, and I finally let myself think. Panic would get me killed. Confrontation would speed up their plan. I needed proof. I needed witnesses. I needed distance. Ray Mercer came to mind, Evan's father. A retired mechanic. A man who trusted facts more than feelings. If anyone could tell the difference between wear and sabotage, it was him. I called for a tow instead of driving the truck. Said it was a safety issue. That wasn't a lie. As the flatbed pulled away under blinking red lights, I felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. Determination had joined it. At Ray's garage, under harsh fluorescent light, the truth revealed itself in metal. The brake line wasn't frayed. It wasn't rusted. It was cut clean through slowly, carefully, deliberately. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Ray looked at me and said quietly, "This wasn't an accident." I nodded. I already knew. As I documented everything, photos, timestamps, notes, I thought about the woman I had been on those stairs, waiting for kindness that never came. I thought about Evan's laughter, my husband's contempt, and I made myself a promise. They wanted my death to look like an accident. I would make the truth impossible to ignore. I cut her brake line. Those words became my warning and my resolve. I would survive. I would be silent when silence was smart, and I would let evidence speak where my voice had been ignored for far too long. Because justice, I was learning, doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it begins with a woman who stops apologizing for staying alive. If you felt her pain too, like this story, and drop your city in the comments, someone nearby might be watching with you. The morning after I overheard Evan's confession, I barely slept. My body ached, not just from bruises still tender from the staircase fall, but from the knowledge that every step I took in my own home could have been my last. I had to move carefully, quietly, and above all, strategically. I was not just protecting myself anymore. I was gathering proof, building a chain of evidence that could survive scrutiny and hold both Evan and my husband accountable. I started with what I could control, the truck. My fingers lingered over the keys as I imagined the nightmare scenario me, driving it unaware, a routine errand turning into fatal betrayal. I couldn't risk it, not for a second. I made the call I had rehearsed in my mind all night. Not to the police, not yet. To someone I could trust completely, Evan's mother, Maria. She lived across the county, quiet, meticulous, a woman who knew machines, who could recognize tampering where others would see nothing. She would know. By mid-morning, I was on the road, fog clinging low over the frost-crusted fields of Ohio, a thin line of ice forming along the edges of the asphalt. My heart was a drum in my chest, each beat reminding me that time was against me. Evan didn't know I had hurt him. My husband didn't know I was taking action. If either of them suspected, everything could spiral into violence before I had the chance to make it tangible. Maria's house was a modest ranch, brick with peeling white trim, a small garden fence that had seen better days. She opened the door in a cardigan and slippers, hair pulled back, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Frank?" she asked, her tone cautious but steady. "It's me," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I need your help. The truck. It's not safe. I don't trust it to be driven, and I need someone who understands cars to check it thoroughly." She studied me for a long moment, her hands folded over her stomach. "Not this again," she said softly, almost as if the words pained her. "But come inside." Inside, her kitchen smelled of brewing coffee and the faint sweetness of cinnamon from the morning pastry she had prepared. I placed the bag of chicken on her counter, now cold, the grease stiff and unappealing. "It's not about food," I said quickly. "It's about the truck." "I overheard him, Evan," he said. "He cut my brake line." Maria froze, the spoon she had been stirring the coffee with hovering midair. "He said that?" "Yes, and my husband didn't stop him. He just agreed silently." My hands shook. I forced them into my coat pockets. "I can't drive it. I can't let anyone else touch it. You have to check it." She nodded slowly, her expression hardening into resolve. "We'll document everything, every inch. You'll have proof this isn't just your word against theirs." In the garage, the truck loomed under the dim overhead light. Maria moved methodically, her hands sure and practiced. She checked the brake lines first, tracing the metal carefully with a flashlight. My stomach lurched as the beam flickered across the hose. It wasn't frayed. It wasn't rusted. It was cut. A deliberate, clean line that confirmed my worst fears. "That's deliberate," Maria said quietly, rolling back on her heels to sit on the creeper. "Someone did this carefully. They wanted this to fail." I leaned against the wall, breathing shallow. The air smelled of oil and cold metal, and for a moment I felt the weight of all the years I had given to this family, the meals, the quiet patience, the nights I stayed awake worrying about Evan, the sacrifices I had made for him and for the household. Tears pricked my eyes, the memories hitting like a wave. I had protected him, loved him, nurtured him as a child not my own, and now he had plotted my death. "I know," I whispered, My voice cracked. I know he's capable of it, and I know my husband helped by staying silent. Maria glanced up, eyes softening slightly. You did the right thing by coming here. You didn't confront him. You kept yourself safe first. That's what matters. End quote. Scene Shear 5. We documented everything, photos of the brake line, notes about the cuts, the position of the truck, timestamps of when I arrived and when I discovered it. Each click of the camera was a step back toward safety, each note a line drawn between fear and evidence. My hands stopped shaking slightly as I realized this chain of proof could keep me alive. Later, we sat in the kitchen, sipping bitter coffee. I recounted the events of the past week, the fall down the stairs, my husband's cruel words, Evan's laughter at my age, and the chilling realization that the people I had trusted most had become my predators. Maria listened without judgment, her presence a calm in the storm. You're not alone in this, she said, and for the first time since the confession in the garage, I believed it. I told her about the subtle signs I had ignored for months, the way my husband had pulled back, the way Evan had tested boundaries, the quiet cruelty masked as jokes, the dismissive smiles when I tried to assert myself. Maria nodded at each detail, her fingers tapping the table. We'll make this airtight. You won't just be telling a story, you'll have proof. By late afternoon, the truck had been thoroughly inspected and documented. I had a record, a chain of evidence, timestamps, and photographs that could survive a court challenge. I felt a cautious relief, but I knew this was only the beginning. Evan and my husband would not stop plotting just because I had taken one step toward safety. I had to be vigilant, silent, patient. I drove home in the fading light, the winter air slicing through the car windows, feeling the familiar ache in my shoulders and chest. The house was quiet when I arrived. My husband was in the living room, reading a newspaper. Evan slouched on the couch, scrolling on his phone. They didn't look up. They didn't suspect. Not yet. I prepared a plan for the next days, gather further proof, involve legal counsel, and ensure I had witnesses outside the house. The silence of the house was oppressive, but I had learned to move carefully, to observe, to protect. I had survived a fall meant to kill me, and now I had survived hearing the words that promised my death. Tonight, I would rest as much as possible, but my mind would not sleep. Every detail, every interaction, every move I had made would be scrutinized and cataloged. I cut her brake line, Evan had said. Those words had changed everything, and I would make sure that, when the time came, they would face the truth they had tried to hide. The following morning, I woke up early, still haunted by Evan's words echoing through the garage. I cut her brake line. The weight of them pressed down on me, heavier than the frost on the window. I didn't dare relax. Every moment I had taken for granted before the quiet breakfast, the casual newspaper in the living room was gone. Now, every sound, every shadow, every step in the house felt like a potential trigger. I poured myself a cup of strong black coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the bitter warmth grounding me. My mind moved methodically, running over the events like a mechanic tracing a failing engine. Staircase fall, husband's cruel words, Evan's laughter, garage confession, the truck, documentation with Maria. Each incident was a thread, and I needed to weave them into a coherent chain that law enforcement, and eventually a court, could not ignore. By mid-morning, I began compiling everything I had so far. Photographs of the brake line, timestamps of the tow, notes from Maria's inspection, and my own observations. I opened a spreadsheet to log each event, date, time, location, who was present, and my description of what happened. I labeled it carefully. Potential felony, vehicle tampering. It felt surreal, turning my life into evidence, cataloging every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every dangerous act. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Evan. Where's the truck? Need it back by tomorrow. I didn't respond. Not yet. I needed to maintain the upper hand, and showing fear or impatience could undo everything. Instead, I forwarded the message to Maria, adding a note, "Keep this as part of the chain." I remembered the staircase again, how I had almost died, and the laughter that followed. My husband's words had cut deeper than the fall itself. "You're too old for this," Evan had said. "Don't move so clumsily." I clenched my jaw. It was one thing to survive. It was another to endure their mockery. I would not allow their contempt to erase my dignity. Every insult, every act of cruelty became fuel, sharpening my focus. By afternoon, I decided I needed professional legal guidance. I called Martha, a seasoned attorney who had handled complex family disputes and elder abuse cases. When she answered, her voice was brisk but welcoming. "Frank, you sound serious. What's happening?" I took a deep breath, recounting the garage confession, the staircase fall, and the deliberate cut in the brake line. I was careful, precise, withholding emotion where possible but making the facts undeniable. Martha listened without interruption, taking notes as I spoke. "This isn't just a family quarrel," she said finally. "This is potentially a felony. We need documentation, witnesses, and a clear timeline. Do not engage with them further without guidance. Every step you take needs to be defensible in court." Her words were both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because of the stakes, comforting because someone else now knew the truth and would help hold it. I spent the next few hours reviewing the house for other possible signs of tampering. I checked locks, moved any objects that could be used against me, and photographed the stairway, remembering how my fall had been nearly fatal. Every small detail was another piece of evidence. Every measure I took reinforced the chain I was building, a web that would not break. By late afternoon, I created a secure folder on my laptop. Subfolders contained photos, scanned messages, timestamps, and a detailed written account. I titled the main folder, Evidence, Evan and Husband Conspiracy. My hands shook as I typed, but the act of organization gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. Later, I called Maria again. She confirmed that she would keep the truck at her garage until the evidence chain was complete. "No one touches it," she said firmly. "I'll inspect it repeatedly if necessary. Anything suspicious, I document immediately." I felt a small surge of relief. For the first time, I had allies outside the household, witnesses who could speak with authority about what I feared the most. Evening came, and I returned home, the house eerily quiet. Evan and my husband were in the living room, faces buried in their own distractions. Their casual confidence made my stomach churn. I reminded myself, appearances can be deceiving. They believed I was unaware, that my fear would paralyze me. I would let them underestimate me. Patience was still my tool. Silence remained my shield. I spent that night making a timeline in painstaking detail. Every interaction, every step of my plan, every message, every call was logged. I annotated it with notes on tone, body language, and the context in which each statement was made. It was exhausting work, but it also gave me clarity. I could see patterns in Evan's behavior, the ways he had tested me for years, and how my husband's silence had facilitated his cruelty. Before going to bed, I stood by the window, looking out at the frosted streetlights and the quiet neighborhood. The cold air hit my cheeks, bracing me. I realized that my survival depended not only on legal strategy and evidence, but on maintaining mental clarity and resolve. The staircase fall, the garage confession, they were warnings, but I was still standing, still alive, still capable of turning the tables. I cut her brake line. The words haunted every corner of my mind, but now they also served as a reminder. I would not be the victim they wanted. I would not cower, not anymore. My plan was in motion, and nothing, not their laughter, not their contempt, not even the threat of death itself, would deter me. Tonight, I rested lightly, my mind never fully asleep, plotting every next move with care, knowing that tomorrow I would continue building the case that would protect my life and, ultimately, my dignity. By the third evening since I had begun gathering evidence, I knew I could no longer remain hidden behind phone calls and spreadsheets. Evan had started to notice the truck was missing. His messages became more insistent, his tone edged with irritation that I wasn't responding. My husband, always casual in his cruelty, seemed to grow impatient with my quiet vigilance, making careless remarks that I filed mentally for the timeline I was building. I decided it was time for the first controlled confrontation. I wasn't going to accuse them outright yet. I needed to gauge their reactions, watch their expressions, and gather subtle confirmations that would reinforce my case. I called Maria first, explaining my plan. "I'll be back later tonight," I said. "Keep the truck where it is. Nothing moves." "Understand?" "Absolutely," she replied firmly. "Document everything you see. Don't trust words alone. It's not have a different six. I drove home as dusk settled over our street, the winter air stinging my cheeks, the frost glistening faintly in the streetlights. Inside, the house seemed normal. A quiet hum of the heater, Evan scrolling on his phone, my husband reading the paper. They believed I was unaware, complacent, still the frightened, bruised woman they had tried to terrorize. How wrong they were. I poured a cup of coffee and carried it into the living room, taking my time, every step deliberate. My husband glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly. "Coffee again?" he said, voice light, but I could feel the edge beneath the surface. "Yes," I said calmly, settling into a chair directly across from Evan. "Do you want some?" Evan laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "For me? No thanks. I wouldn't drink it if it were poisoned, Grandma." His words were meant to cut, to humiliate. I ignored him, focusing on the subtle twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward my hands, where I rested them on the table. "You've been quiet lately," my husband said. "Planning something?" I tilted my head slowly, letting the weight of the silence settle between us. "I've been thinking," I said softly, "about accidents, about how fragile life can be, about choices." Evan snorted. "You're acting paranoid. You're too old to understand the world around you." End quote. Something inside me tightened. I remembered the fall down the stairs, his laughter, my husband's harsh words. Every humiliating moment rose together, a wave of anger and fear I had buried deep for too long. But I stayed calm. Patience was my ally, control my weapon. "I heard something a few nights ago," I continued, watching both of them carefully. "Something that could have ended my life." My words were slow, deliberate, leaving space for tension to grow. Evan froze, his fingers tightening around the phone in his lap. My husband blinked, trying to mask his reaction, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "What are you talking about?" Evan asked, a little too quickly, his voice tight. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. "I heard you say—" I cut her brake line. The room went silent. The heater hummed. The clock ticked. Even the creak of the floorboard seemed amplified. Evan's face drained of color, and my husband's eyes flickered, a mix of annoyance and panic barely restrained. "Are you serious?" my husband asked finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I am," I said. My tone was calm, but the weight behind it was palpable, and I've taken steps to ensure that any further attempts at accidents won't go unnoticed. Evan's lips twitched, an attempt at a smirk that failed to hide the fear behind his eyes. "You're overreacting," he said, voice quivering despite the bravado. "No," I said firmly, "I'm not." I leaned slightly forward, keeping eye contact. "I have witnesses, documentation, and proof, and every word, every action, every threat will be recorded and traced. I am no longer the frightened woman I was when you and your father thought you could manipulate me." The words hung in the air. Evan shifted in his seat, discomfort obvious. My husband opened his mouth, then closed it again. The calculated silence of months had been broken, and for the first time, they saw the consequences of their actions forming like ice around them. I stood up slowly, deliberately pacing to the window, letting the streetlight illuminate my figure. "Tonight," I said, turning back to them, "I am choosing to act, quietly, but decisively, and I will not allow fear or intimidation to dictate my life." Evan's face paled further. What have you done?" he whispered. "Enough to ensure my safety," I replied. I didn't need to specify. The weight of my presence, the knowledge they had been discovered, was enough. I had no weapon other than evidence, patience, and my own resolve, but it was more than sufficient. Before leaving the room, I added softly, "I remember all the years I gave to this family, the meals, the sacrifices, the care for you, Evan, and yet, you and your father thought my life was expendable. That ends now." I left the room with a deliberate calm, the sound of my heels echoing through the hallway, a subtle reminder that I was still here, still alive, and still in control of the narrative. In the kitchen, I made sure the doors were locked and checked the security cameras I had set up discreetly over the past few days. Every angle, every approach was documented. Later, alone in my room, I sat at the desk and added the evening's events to my growing folder. Time-stamped notes, dialogue, observations of demeanor. Every shift in expression, every nervous glance, Every failed attempt at intimidation was catalogued. I was building a fortress of evidence around myself, brick by brick, that they could not destroy. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power, not rage, not vengeance control. They could no longer dictate my safety, my fear, or my next move. Every action they took would now be documented, and the truth would follow them like a shadow they could not escape. I cut her brake line. Those words had initiated a chain reaction I could never undo, but I would see it through. From this point on, every conversation, every movement, every silent threat would be proof. And when the time came, justice quiet, relentless, and unstoppable would prevail. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The gray light of Ohio winter barely filtering through the blinds. My body ached from the staircase fall and the tension of last night's confrontation, but I couldn't afford to rest. I had to ensure that every piece of evidence I had collected was airtight, every witness ready, and every move calculated. There was no margin for error. Not now. Not ever. I started with the truck again. Maria had agreed to keep it under lock and key, but I needed to cross-check her notes with mine. Sitting at my desk, I reviewed each photograph, each timestamp, every detail of the brake line cut. I annotated them meticulously. The position of the truck in the driveway, the way the light caught the edges of the clean slice in the metal, even the direction Evan had approached it days before. Every detail mattered. Any discrepancy could give them an opening to discredit me. By mid-morning, I had drafted a preliminary timeline: staircase incident, Evan's taunts about my age, my husband's silence, the garage confession, the tow and inspection by Maria. I labeled each event: witnessed, documented, corroborated. The clarity of it made the danger feel more manageable. I could see the full pattern, a coordinated effort to eliminate me quietly, hide behind the guise of accidents, and profit from the insurance. I called Martha, my attorney, to outline the strategy. I need to ensure that this isn't just hearsay, I explained. I need a documented chain that will survive court scrutiny. Photos, timestamps, witness statements, logs, every angle, every interaction. Martha's voice was calm but firm. Good, that's exactly what you need. Do not confront them directly again until we are ready. Every move you make now strengthens your case. And Frank, she paused, you need to be ready to present this in a controlled environment, with witnesses present. I hung up and immediately began drafting a script, mentally rehearsing the questions I might ask Evan or my husband if I were forced into another confrontation. I practiced subtle observations, eye movements, tone of voice, pauses, micro-expressions. I had learned to watch Evan like a hawk over the past days, and now I was sharpening my observation skills for a more formal confrontation. By afternoon, I called Maria again. Keep the truck exactly where it is, I instructed. Check the brake line one more time and take photos from different angles. Timestamp everything. Do not let anyone touch it. Her voice was firm. You have nothing to worry about. I'll document every inch. If they try anything, we'll have it recorded. And quote, I went through the house, photographing the staircase, the exact spots where I had fallen, and the objects that could have been moved to facilitate the fall. I cataloged the photos, adding notes on possible motives and prior threats. Each annotation strengthened the narrative. Accidents weren't accidents, they were orchestrated. Late in the afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. I wrote out the full account of the past week in chronological order, including every word, every gesture, every laugh and sneer that Evan had made at my expense. My husband's silence was as damning as Evan's words. I formatted everything for easy access, a digital file ready for legal review, a clear, undeniable story of intent and collusion. The next step was subtle but critical. I prepared a trap without making it obvious. I left minor, inconsequential objects out in plain view, pieces of paper, an unlocked drawer, a folder on my desk, anything that could be observed, noted, and later corroborated by timestamps and photos. The goal was to create a pattern they could not deny without incriminating themselves further. I was learning to manipulate the environment carefully, to turn their own overconfidence against them. As dusk fell, I brewed another cup of strong coffee and looked out the window at the quiet street. Evan had not yet returned from his daily errands, and my husband was still distracted in the living room. The house was deceptively calm. but I could feel the tension coiling beneath the surface, the anticipation of the confrontation to come. Every movement, every decision, every step I had taken to document and secure the evidence had prepared me for this moment. Later, I called Martha one more time to review the sequence. "Frank, this is a psychological game now as well as a legal one," she said. "They will try to intimidate you, to provoke you into making mistakes. Stay calm, follow the plan, and let the evidence speak for itself." I ended the call and sat in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the heater and the occasional car passing outside. I allowed myself a moment of reflection. All the sacrifices I had made for this family, raising Evan, supporting my husband, keeping the household afloat, were not in vain. They had tried to erase me, to dismiss me, to harm me, but I had survived, and now I was ready to ensure they could not do it again. The first confrontation had shown me their reactions, their subtle panic, and their overconfidence. The next steps would require patience, precision, and the absolute certainty that I was untouchable in terms of evidence. Every photo, every log, every witness, Martha was a shield, a barrier between me and the threat that had been hiding in plain sight. I cut her brake line. Those words had triggered a chain reaction that I would control. I had survived almost being pushed down the stairs. I had survived humiliation, mockery, and threats, and I would survive this. Because from this point on, I was no longer the quiet, compliant woman they expected. I was a strategist, a documentarian, and a survivor. The trap was set, the evidence secured, and the game had changed. By the time night fell, I felt the faintest trace of calm. Not relief, there was too much at stake for that, but a controlled readiness. I had built a fortress of proof around myself, prepared every step, and anticipated their next moves. The danger had not diminished, but I was no longer defenseless. The next phase would be to make their actions undeniable to the outside world, and I would do it with precision, patience, and unyielding resolve. The night after securing the truck and finalizing my preliminary evidence, I knew I couldn't afford to rest completely. Fear had transformed into vigilance, and vigilance required observation. I set up small, discreet cameras in the main rooms, the living room, the kitchen, even the garage, and I placed my phone in positions that could capture sounds as well as movement. Every whisper, every step, every gesture could be another piece of proof. I sat in my bedroom, behind the glow of the laptop, watching the live feeds in silence. Evan's tall silhouette moved casually around the living room, flipping through a magazine, laughing at something on his phone. My husband hovered near the kitchen, drinking a cup of coffee, reading the paper. Neither of them suspected the eyes that followed them. I reviewed each feed methodically. Every glance Evan gave my way, every subtle smirk when I walked past, became a note in my mental log. "He enjoys testing boundaries," I wrote. "He believes he can intimidate me." The staircase fall, the brake line confession, the mockery, they were all threads weaving together, and I was tracing them meticulously. My thoughts drifted briefly to the past. I had raised Evan, nurtured him, sacrificed for him, and for that, he had mocked me and plotted my death. My chest tightened as I recalled the nights I stayed awake waiting for him to come home safely. The afternoons spent cooking meals for him, ironing his shirts, attending to his minor ailments, and smoothing over conflicts his father ignored. And now he was actively trying to destroy me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I was not going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I documented every subtle infraction I could spot through the cameras. The way Evan leaned against the counter when he thought I wasn't watching, the way his father's eyes flicked with impatience or amusement at my presence. I time-stamped each moment, annotating behaviors that reflected threat or intent. Every small movement became a part of a growing dossier that would hold up in court. Occasionally, I would step out into the kitchen, pour myself another cup of coffee, and let my gaze linger on the staircase, the very scene where my life had almost ended. I imagined the sequence, how one misplaced step could have sent me tumbling, how carefully orchestrated it must have been. I felt a chill, a mixture of fear and resolve, knowing that any evidence I gathered now would prevent a similar attempt in the future. I also set up a small digital notebook to track their conversations. Texts, phone calls, casual comments, laughter, they were all pieces of a puzzle that I needed to assemble. Every sarcastic remark, every dismissive phrase, Every condescending tone was catalogued. I knew that when the time came, these tiny details could be the difference between disbelief and conviction. The night dragged on, but I did not waver. I remained alert, my eyes scanning the feeds, my ears straining for the faintest sound of collusion. I imagined Evan's overconfidence as a weapon I could turn against him. They believed I was fearful, fragile, and distracted. In truth, I was meticulously documenting every indication of their intent, every proof of their malice, and every shred of their arrogance. As midnight approached, I sat back and allowed myself a brief reflection. I thought about all the meals I had prepared for this family, the care I had given, and the silent sacrifices I had endured. I thought about the staircase, the laughter, the cruel words, and I knew that my survival depended not just on observation, but on control. Every photo, every timestamp, every camera angle was a step toward ensuring that I would not be a victim again. "I cut her brake line," Evan had said. The words reverberated through my mind like a bell I could not unring. And yet, now, they were no longer a threat. They were a guide, a warning, and a roadmap to exposing the truth. I ended the night by reviewing all the footage once more, making sure that no angle had been missed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, logging notes and timestamps, organizing files, ensuring nothing could be disputed. Each entry reinforced my position. I was not powerless, I was not alone, and I would not be silenced. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I felt a cautious confidence. I had built a network of evidence, fortified my position, and prepared for the next steps. Evan and my husband still believed they controlled the narrative, but the game had shifted. I was no longer a passive observer. I was the strategist. I was the witness. And when the time came, I would ensure the truth could not be denied. The next morning, I felt the weight of every careful step I had taken over the past week. The cameras, the timestamps, the notes, they were not enough. I needed a legal foundation. Someone who could translate my careful documentation into a force that would hold up in court. Martha, my attorney, became my anchor. I called her early, before Evan had left for the day. "We need to formalize everything," I said. "Photos, videos, text messages, timestamps, every detail needs to be irrefutable." End quote. She agreed immediately. "Frank, this isn't just about documenting. This is about preparing for confrontation in a legal context. If you present this correctly, they will have no room to maneuver. You must not engage directly with them again until the evidence is fully secured." I spent the morning organizing every photograph from Maria's inspection of the truck. I annotated each with notes on what was deliberate and what was accidental. Every angle, every shadow, every reflection was cataloged. Then I moved to the digital files. Recordings of Evan's mockery, conversations overheard in the garage, even the cruel laughter he had made at my expense after the staircase fall. My heart tightened as I relived each moment, but I reminded myself that every memory, every humiliation, was now part of a strategy that could save my life. By mid-afternoon, I compiled a detailed timeline spanning from the staircase incident to the garage confession. I added every action, every word, and included notes about my husband's passive complicity. Martha had advised that each entry be precise, with dates, times, and context clearly explained. It was exhausting work, but I was meticulous. Mistakes here could cost me everything. The next step was creating a secure log of communications. Texts, emails, and even voicemail snippets were all recorded and time-stamped. I created a password-protected folder on my laptop, backed up on an encrypted drive, and I knew that if anything happened to me, this chain of evidence would speak for itself. When evening came, I practiced my approach for the next confrontation. Not a direct accusation, but a controlled environment where their reactions could be observed and recorded. Martha suggested that I anticipate their body language, tone, and facial expressions. I rehearsed silently in my living room, imagining Evan's smirk, my husband's feigned casualness, and how I would respond with calm, deliberate words. The night was long. I reviewed the security footage once more, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Every subtle glance, every twitch of an eye, every sign of guilt was noted. I organized the files so that if needed, I could present a coherent narrative that any jury could follow. By the time I finally allowed myself to sit back, I felt a cautious relief. I had created a framework, a structure that could not easily be challenged. My husband and Evan might continue to believe they had control, but the reality was different now. I had shifted the balance of power. The final preparation was psychological. I wrote notes for myself on how to maintain composure, how to react if they attempted intimidation, and how to ensure that the evidence remained the centerpiece of any encounter. Fear would be present, yes, but it would not dictate my actions. I had survived attempts on my life, endured humiliation, and now I was methodical, precise, and ready. As I closed the laptop, I felt the weight of the days behind me and the anticipation of those ahead. "I cut her brake line," Evan had said. Those words no longer struck me with panic. They were the reason I had built this network of proof, the catalyst for a plan that would protect my life and ensure justice. From this point forward, I was not just surviving, I was preparing to take the next step with clarity, strategy, and determination. The morning was quiet, deceptively normal, but I felt a surge of purpose as I brewed my coffee. Today, I would conduct a subtle test, an observation of their behavior under controlled conditions. The cameras and notes were ready, the timeline was finalized, and the truck remained securely at Maria's garage. I needed to see how Evan and my husband would react when I subtly referenced the threat without revealing all I had. I carried a stack of papers to the living room, pretending to review household bills. My husband glanced up. "Busy as always," he said, voice casual. Evan smirked from the couch, scrolling through his phone. He hadn't yet discovered that I had taken control of the situation. That smirk would soon vanish. I set the papers on the coffee table and leaned back, letting my gaze settle on Evan. "I was thinking about that truck," I said casually. "The one that was having issues last week." I kept my tone light, almost conversational, as if I were mentioning nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Evan's eyes flickered, a quick hesitation he tried to mask. My husband's posture stiffened ever so slightly, the newspaper folding unevenly in his hands. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but anticipation. The subtle reaction confirmed what I already suspected. They knew something had shifted, but they did not yet understand the depth of my preparations. "I'm grateful Maria checked it thoroughly," I continued. "It's comforting to know the brake line was inspected. Safety matters, especially in winter." I watched as Evan's fingers tightened around his phone. My husband didn't look away, but his jaw worked unconsciously. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Evan's voice, attempting casual, forced humor. "You're still worried about that old truck? It's probably fine." He laughed, but the sound was hollow. I nodded slowly. "Maybe," I said softly, "but some things can't be taken lightly. I wouldn't want anyone hurt over negligence or intent." My words were gentle but pointed, carefully chosen to plant doubt and unease. Evan shifted uncomfortably. My husband, sensing the tension, finally set the paper aside. "Frank, stop reading into it," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's just conversation." I smiled slightly, letting my eyes meet theirs in a quiet challenge. "Conversation can reveal a lot," I replied. "It can show what people are willing to hide, or what they hope goes unnoticed." "And way." Evan looked away, and I made a mental note of every detail, the twitch of his eye, the way his fingers tapped nervously on the arm of the couch, the subtle tightening of his lips. These reactions were proof in themselves, confirming his awareness and unease without a single overt accusation from me. After several minutes, I rose and moved to the kitchen, pretending to check a recipe on my laptop. I let the tension linger, the quiet hum of the heating system filling the space between us. I could feel the shift their overconfidence had cracked just slightly. That was enough for now. Evidence was being built, even in their subtle reactions. Later, I reviewed the footage and notes from the morning. Each glance, each hesitation, each tiny display of discomfort was catalogued. My meticulous observation, paired with Maria's inspection records, my documentation of past incidents, and the timeline I had prepared, now formed a nearly unassailable network of evidence. As evening approached, I called Martha to update her. "They're reacting," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Even without me making accusations, they're uncomfortable. Every look, every pause, every twitch, it's building the case." Martha's voice was calm but approving. "Good. That's exactly what we want. Let them underestimate you. Let them slip. We are building a psychological record alongside the physical evidence. This is as important as the photos and timestamps. That marrying inspired. After the call, I sat by the window, looking out at the street, listening to the muffled sounds of traffic and the occasional footsteps of a neighbor walking home. The quiet was deceptive, hiding the storm I had set in motion. I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The sacrifices I had made, the years of care and patience I had given this family, and the pain I had endured. But these reflections were now tempered with purpose. Every humiliation, every threat, every near miss was a layer of strategy, building toward their eventual exposure. Before bed, I checked the cameras once more. The living room, the kitchen, even the hallway leading to the staircase, all angles were monitored. The subtle test had yielded results, and I catalogued each observation meticulously. Evan's smirk, my husband's tense jaw, the slight avoidance of eye contact, they were small pieces, but critical pieces of the puzzle. "I cut her brake line," Evan had said. Those words echoed, but now they resonated differently. They were no longer a threat. They were a guide, showing me exactly how to proceed. My network of proof was growing, my strategy taking shape, and my control over the situation was expanding. I turned off the lights and sat in the quiet of my room, letting the events of the day settle. I was exhausted, yes, but alert. My life depended on every detail, every careful observation, and every record I maintained. I had survived almost being pushed down the stairs, endured mockery and scorn, and now I was preparing to ensure that the law would stand on my side. The trap was set. The proof was being collected. And I was no longer a passive observer. I was ready to strike when the moment was right, with clarity, precision, and unwavering resolve. The pressure didn't explode all at once. It crept in, subtle and insidious, seeping through the walls of the house like cold air through a cracked window. I felt it the moment Evan started pacing more than usual, his footsteps heavier, his temper shorter. Confidence, when threatened, often turns into recklessness. I was counting on that. 2 days after my subtle test, Evan confronted me in the kitchen. I was rinsing a mug, the sound of water steady, calming. He leaned against the counter too close, invading my space the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. "So," he said, voice low, "you still planning on keeping the truck from me?" I didn't turn around right away. I dried my hands carefully, buying time, letting the camera above the cabinet catch every angle. "It's not safe," I said evenly. "I've told you that," he scoffed. "You're exaggerating. You always do that when you want attention." I met his eyes then, steady, unflinching. "This isn't about attention. It's about safety." His jaw tightened. "You think Maria knows more than I do? She's been out of the game for years." I noted the phrasing. Defensive, dismissive. He was trying to undermine her credibility before anyone else could. That mattered. "Funny," I said calmly, because she knew exactly what she was looking at. For a split second, his mask slipped. Just a fraction. "Enough." He looked away, then laughed too loudly. "Whatever," he muttered, pushing past me. I watched him go, my heart pounding not with fear, but with certainty. He was cracking. That evening, my husband joined him. We were sitting in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. He lowered his voice, the way he always did when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Frank, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I kept my eyes on the screen. "Am I?" "Yes," he said sharply. "You're creating problems. The truck, the tension, the way you keep watching us. It's unhealthy." I turned to him then. "What's unhealthy?" I said carefully, "is pretending nothing happened." His face flushed. "You're imagining things." I leaned forward slightly. "Then you have nothing to worry about." Silence followed. Thick, heavy. He stood abruptly and left the room. Another reaction. Another note added. Later that night, I reviewed the footage. Evan's confrontation, my husband's attempt at control. Their coordinated frustration. I labeled the files behavioral escalation. I added timestamps, transcripts, and my observations. Patterns were emerging, patterns of intimidation, denial, and pressure. The next day, the pressure escalated again. I came home from the grocery store to find my bedroom door slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it. My pulse quickened, but I didn't react outwardly. I went about unpacking groceries, then checked the camera feed later. Evan had been in my room. He rifled through my desk, opened drawers, searched my nightstand. He was looking for something, documents, perhaps, or proof that I had more than I was letting on. The footage was clear, damning. I sat down hard in the chair, my hands shaking for the first time in days, not from fear, from the realization that he had crossed another line. This wasn't just planning anymore, this was active interference. I called Martha immediately. "He went through my room," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have it on video." "That's excellent," she replied without hesitation. "Not for you, of course, but legally. That's intimidation and evidence tampering. Save the file. Back it up. We're getting close to the tipping point." That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was racing ahead. Evan was desperate. My husband was losing control. Desperation breeds mistakes. The mistake came the next morning. Evan cornered me near the staircase, the same staircase where I had nearly died. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "You need to stop," he said quietly, his voice tight. "You're pushing things too far." I met his gaze. "Too far for who?" "For everyone," he snapped. "You think you're protected? You're not as smart as you think." The words were a threat, clear, undeniable. I stepped back deliberately, ensuring the camera caught everything. "Are you threatening me, Evan?" He hesitated. "Just long enough. I'm warning you." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for clarifying." He stormed off, breathing hard. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting lightly on the banister. This place had almost killed me once. It would not get another chance. That afternoon I compiled everything. The confrontation in the kitchen, the pressure from my husband, the search of my room, the staircase threat. I organized it into a single, chronological file titled Escalation of Threat. I added annotations explaining context, intent, and pattern. When I sent the file to Martha, she called me immediately. "This changes things," she said. "This is no longer just preparation. This is ongoing danger. We're ready to involve law enforcement." I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and gravity settling over me. The quiet phase was ending. The storm was coming. That evening, I sat alone in my room, listening to the house settle. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who blamed herself, who swallowed insults, who believed love required endurance. That woman had almost died on those stairs. I was not her anymore. I cut her brake line. The words had started this journey, but now they were only part of a larger truth. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had exposed themselves. The pressure was tightening, and this time, it wasn't on me. It was on them. The moment Martha said the words, ongoing danger, something inside me settled into place. Not fear, clarity. I had spent weeks documenting, observing, and enduring. Now the line had been crossed so clearly that even doubt no longer had a foothold. I didn't rush. I learned early in this ordeal that haste was the enemy of survival. Instead, I spent that morning doing exactly what Evan and my husband expected me to do. Nothing unusual. I made breakfast. I washed dishes. I folded laundry. I moved through the house like the same quiet woman they had underestimated for years. But inside, I was preparing to end this. The house felt different now. Not dangerous in the way it had before, but exposed. Every room held echoes of their mistakes. The living room where my husband tried to gaslight me. The kitchen where Evan's voice sharpened into threats. The staircase where my life had almost ended. This place had become a record, and I was the archivist. I waited until both of them left the house. Then I began the final sweep. I photographed everything again: locks, doors, windows, the garage, the stairs. I checked my files twice, then backed them up a third time. One copy stayed on my encrypted drive. One went to a secure cloud folder. One I emailed directly to Martha with a single line: "If anything happens to me, this is everything." My phone buzzed while I was packing a small overnight bag. "Evan, you been snooping again?" the message read. I didn't respond. Minutes later, another message from my husband. "Where are you going? We need to talk." I exhaled slowly. This was it. The shift from quiet intimidation to direct pressure. They could feel control slipping, and control was the only thing they had ever relied on. I replied carefully, "I'm staying with a friend. I need space." The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. I was halfway out the door when the front lock rattled. They were back. Too soon. My heart accelerated, but my mind stayed clear. I stepped back into the hallway just as Evan entered, his expression dark, eyes scanning my hands, the bag at my feet. "What's going on?" he demanded. "I told you," I said evenly. "I need space." My husband came in behind him, closing the door with deliberate force. "You don't just leave," he said. "Not after everything you've been stirring up." I felt the weight of the moment press down on me. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was containment. "I'm not stirring anything," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." Evan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "From what? Your imagination?" I looked at him steadily. "From you." Silence fell. My husband's face hardened. "You don't know what you're accusing us of." "I know exactly what I'm accusing you of," I said. "And I have proof." That was the mistake. Evan stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You don't have anything." And at 12, "I do," I said. "And you know it. That's why you went through my room. That's why you keep pushing." His eyes flicked just for a second to the hallway camera, then back to me. "You think that matters?" he said quietly. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" My hand tightened around my phone. It was recording. Everything. "I think the truth matters," I said. He moved faster than I expected. He reached for my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to intimidate. "Stop," I said sharply. My husband didn't intervene. That was the moment the last thread snapped. "Get your hands off me," I said louder now. Evan leaned in. "Or what?" I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I raised my phone so he could see it. "This is live," I said, "and it's not the only one." His grip loosened immediately. My husband finally spoke, his voice strained. "Frank, let's calm down." "No," I said. "We're past that." I stepped back, keeping distance between us. "I've documented everything. The brake line, the staircase, the threats, the intimidation, the search of my room. This right now is the final piece." Evan's face drained of color. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice wavered. "I'm not," I replied, "and you know it." For a moment, no one moved. Then Evan swore under his breath and stormed toward the door. "This isn't over," he said. I met his gaze. "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." They left without another word. My knees nearly gave out once the door slammed shut. I sat down hard on the couch, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the release of holding myself together for so long. I called Martha immediately. "They crossed the line," I said. "Physical intimidation. Recorded." Her response was immediate. "Leave the house now. Go somewhere safe. I'm contacting law enforcement." I didn't argue. I grabbed my bag and left through the back door, my heart pounding as I drove away from the only home I had known for years. As the distance grew between me and that house, I felt something unexpected. Relief. They had tried to silence me. They had tried to scare me into submission. Instead, they had handed me exactly what I needed. I cut her brake line. Those words had once meant death. Now, they meant accountability. I didn't know what the next days would bring: interviews, statements, courtrooms, but I knew this much with absolute certainty. I had survived. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in the spare bedroom of a friend's house, fully dressed, phone beside me, lights on, listening to every unfamiliar sound as if it might follow me there. When morning came, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of a long-held breath finally being released. Martha called just after 7. "They're ready," she said. "You need to come in. Bring everything." I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. Law enforcement had crossed the threshold I had been carefully preparing for, and once that door opened, there was no going back. At the police station, the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The waiting room was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of calm that feels artificial when your life is unraveling behind your ribs. I clutched my bag, the one that carried my entire survival strategy inside it drives, printouts, notes, timestamps, recordings, my life, reduced to files. A detective introduced himself. Middle-aged, steady voice, eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Mrs. Carter," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the staircase, the way the carpet runner had shifted, the way my husband yelled instead of helping, Evan's laughter. I told him about the garage, about the words that changed everything. I cut her brake line. The detective didn't interrupt. He took notes, nodded occasionally, asked for clarification only when necessary. When I finished, my throat was raw, my hands numb. "Do you have evidence?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said. "All of it." I handed over the first drive. What followed felt unreal, like watching my own life replayed through someone else's eyes. The photos of the brake line, the inspection notes from Maria, the video of Evan in my bedroom, the recording of him cornering me near the stairs, the confrontation where his hand grabbed my arm. The detective's jaw tightened slightly as he watched. Not disbelief, recognition. "This is serious," he said, "and you did the right thing by leaving." They took my statement formally. Then another officer came in, this one quieter, asking questions about insurance policies, beneficiaries, recent changes. I answered carefully. Honestly, the truth was finally allowed to breathe. Around noon, the detective stood. "We're going to your house," he said. "With you, if you're willing." My stomach clenched. "Yes," I said anyway. "I'll go." The drive back felt longer than it should have. The familiar streets looked different now, no longer neutral, no longer safe. Just before we turned onto my block, the detective said quietly, "You don't have to speak unless you want to. We'll handle it." I'm grist. When we pulled into the driveway, Evan's car was there. So was my husband's. The sight made my heart race, but I stayed in the car as instructed. 2 officers approached the front door. I watched through the windshield, my breath shallow. The door opened. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Evan's body language shift almost immediately, shoulders tense, head jerking back slightly. My husband stepped into view next, hands raised in that performative calm I had seen so many times. They asked to come in. Then they asked questions. Then they asked for Evan. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the detective returned to the car. "They're cooperating," he said neutrally. For now, I knew what that meant. They were pretending, stalling, calculating. I was escorted inside briefly to retrieve personal belongings. Walking through that house with officers beside me felt surreal. The walls seemed to lean inward, heavy with memories, meals cooked, holidays endured, years swallowed. Evan stood in the living room, arms crossed, face pale but defiant. He looked at me and sneered. "So this is what you do now? Hide behind cops?" I met his gaze calmly. "I stand behind the truth." My husband didn't look at me. Not once. Upstairs, I packed essentials documents, clothes, the photo of my younger self. I kept tucked away. I paused at the top of the staircase. The banister felt cold under my hand. This place had almost ended me. It wouldn't get the chance again. Downstairs, an officer asked Evan a question. "Did you tamper with the brake line on your stepmother's vehicle?" Evan laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous." The officer nodded. "Then you won't mind explaining why your fingerprints are on the cut." It's scribe. The color drained from his face. I didn't stay for the rest. Back at the station, Martha met me with a tight nod. "You did everything right," she said. "Whatever happens next, you're protected." That word protected felt unfamiliar, heavy, earned. That evening, alone again, I sat quietly and let it sink in. For the first time since the staircase, since the garage, since the laughter and the threats, the weight wasn't on my chest anymore. It had shifted. I cut her brake line. "I'm serving Revit. I'm serving Revit." Those words had once been a death sentence whispered in the dark attachment of my home. Now, they were evidence. And evidence doesn't whisper. It speaks, and it doesn't let go. I thought I was prepared for the courtroom. I was wrong. Nothing truly prepares you for sitting 10 feet away from the people who tried to end your life while a judge decides whether your story deserves to move forward. The room was smaller than I expected, beige walls, fluorescent lights, the quiet hum of a system that doesn't care about emotions, only facts. I reminded myself of that as I took my seat beside Martha. Facts, evidence, timeline, not fear. Evan sat across the room, shoulders squared, jaw tight, dressed neatly as if appearance alone could erase intent. My husband sat beside him, eyes down, hands folded. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. I wondered briefly if he felt shame, or if that emotion had never learned to live inside him. The judge entered. Everyone rose. When we sat again, the weight of the moment pressed into my chest, not panic, but gravity. This was the point of no return. The prosecutor began calmly, methodically, laying out the sequence of events. Staircase fall, vehicle tampering, recorded statements, witness testimony. Each word landed like a measured strike. No drama, no exaggeration. Just truth, delivered cleanly. When the words "deliberate break line cut" echoed in the room, Evan shifted in his seat. I noticed it immediately. Old habits die hard. He had always underestimated observation. The prosecutor introduced the first piece of evidence, photographs from Maria's inspection. Enlarged images of the brake line, cleanly severed. The courtroom screen displayed the damage in unforgiving clarity. "Is this consistent with wear and tear?" the prosecutor asked the expert witness. "No," Maria said firmly. "This was intentional." I felt something loosen in my chest. Then came the video. The footage of Evan entering my bedroom, searching, opening drawers, his body language confident, invasive. The room was silent as it played. I didn't look at him. I watched the judge instead, watched his brow furrow. The defense objected. The judge overruled. Next came the audio recording. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Evan's voice filled the courtroom. "You're not as smart as you think." My stomach tightened, but I didn't look away. I had heard those words in fear once. Now, they were stripped of power, reduced to evidence. When the recording ended, there was a pause. Not awkward, heavy. Then the defense tried to speak. They suggested misunderstandings, family conflict, emotional instability. They hinted carefully that I was overreacting, that I was frightened, that fear can distort perception. Martha stood. "Fear," she said evenly, "does not cut brake lines." The judge nodded once. I was called to the stand. Walking to the witness chair felt like stepping into bright light after years in shadow. I swore to tell the truth. My voice was steady when I began, though my hands trembled slightly. I told the story as I had lived it, not dramatically, not defensively. I spoke of the fall, the humiliation, the laughter, the silence that followed. I spoke of the garage, of the words that changed everything. I cut her brake line. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts stood without me begging them to. The defense tried to trip me up, asked why I hadn't gone to the police immediately, asked why I installed cameras, asked why I didn't confront them sooner. "Because," I said calmly, "confrontation would have gotten me killed." End quote. The room was still. The judge asked a question, directly. "Mrs. Carter, what made you believe this was not an accident?" I met his eyes. "Because accidents don't escalate. Patterns do." When I stepped down, my knees felt weak, but my mind was clear. I had told the truth, fully, without apology. The judge recessed briefly. Those 10 minutes felt longer than the weeks that had preceded them. Evan stared straight ahead. My husband stared at the floor. I stared at my hands, at the faint scar on my wrist from the staircase fall, at the life I had almost lost. When the judge returned, the room stood again, then sat. "I find sufficient probable cause to proceed," he said. "The evidence presented suggests credible intent and ongoing danger." Evan's breath hitched audibly. A protective order was granted. Evan was ordered to have no contact with me. The case would move forward. The gavel struck. It was not loud, but it was final. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. I didn't stop. Martha placed a hand on my shoulder and guided me past them. "You did well," she said quietly. I nodded, though the word "well" felt inadequate for surviving something like this. That evening, alone in the quiet of a temporary apartment, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker on. I thought about the woman I had been before this, quiet, accommodating, willing to absorb pain to keep peace. That woman had been almost erased. I cut her brake line. Those words had once been spoken in confidence, behind closed doors, meant to disappear with me. Now, they were on record. And records don't forget. They wait. They testify. And they endure. The days following the preliminary hearing felt both heavy and electric. The legal system had acknowledged the danger I was in, but acknowledgement didn't erase the lingering threat that Evan and my husband still posed. I could feel it in their behavior, the subtle glances, the tense conversations behind closed doors, the small mistakes that came from their growing frustration. The walls of the house, once just familiar spaces, had become a theater where their desperation played out. Evan's confidence was fraying. He had always relied on fear and my husband's silent approval to maintain control. But now, with cameras, recordings, and the legal system watching, he was forced to temper his aggression, even as he seethed. I noticed it the moment he came home from work that afternoon. His gait was uneven, his hand brushing the stair railing more tightly than necessary, a silent sign of irritation he couldn't mask. I remained calm, my actions deliberate. I moved through the house with quiet authority, making notes in my journal, updating the timeline, reviewing photos, and refining the narrative I would eventually present in court. Every minor detail of Evan's behavior, his frown, the way he avoided eye contact, the quickened steps was added to my documentation. Every subtle movement was another piece of proof that they could not discredit. That evening, my husband attempted to assert control, standing in the doorway of the kitchen as I prepared dinner. "Frank, we need to talk," he said, voice tight. I didn't look up. "About what?" I asked casually, though my mind was sharp, ready for any ploy or manipulation. "About all of this," he replied. "This is tearing the family apart." I sighed, measuring my words. The family was never intact when fear and deception ruled it. Now we are only dealing with reality. Bino now nated. Evan joined him, leaning against the counter, trying to radiate casual confidence, but failing. "You're overreacting," he said. "You've gone too far. Everyone will see that." I looked at him steadily. The truth cannot be too far. It can only be acknowledged. They didn't respond. For a moment, the kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clatter of utensils I used to stir the sauce. Their silence was a concession I recognized instinctively. They were caught in a tightening web, each mistake adding weight to their undoing. Later, I reviewed the recordings from the day, cataloging each interaction carefully. Evan's outburst, my husband's interference, the subtle threats, they were all part of a larger picture, a pattern of deliberate intimidation. Each recorded reaction strengthened the legal foundation I had built. I added notes about body language, voice tone, and micro-expressions, ensuring that even the smallest details could not be dismissed. That night, I reflected on how far we had come. The initial threat, the staircase fall, the garage confession, the brake line had escalated into an undeniable sequence of acts. Evan's increasing recklessness, combined with my husband's futile attempts to maintain control, exposed the extent of their collusion. Their unraveling was subtle but unmistakable. I realized that I had survived not only by caution but by transforming fear into strategy. Every observation, every timestamp, every photograph was now a tool. The house, once a place of terror, had become a living record of their intent and my careful response. I cut her brake line. Evan's words, once meant to intimidate, now echoed differently. They were a reminder of the chain of events I had meticulously documented, a trail of proof that would no longer allow them to hide behind charm or manipulation. The unraveling had begun, and there was no turning back. By the end of the evening, I felt a quiet sense of readiness. The pressure had shifted. It was no longer a matter of survival alone, it was about ensuring accountability. Each mistake Evan and my husband made added another layer to the case, another brick in the wall of evidence I had built. The unraveling was just beginning. And for the first time in months, I sensed that justice might not be a distant hope but an approaching certainty. The days after the preliminary hearing were charged with an electric tension that hummed through the walls of the house. I returned home briefly under careful supervision, bringing only essentials, knowing each movement, each glance, could be observed and misinterpreted by them. The house felt different. Even familiar corners seemed to bristle with potential danger. Evan's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He stomped through the hallways, muttering to himself, knocking over minor objects, testing boundaries that had been carefully established. My husband tried to maintain his composure, but the tension in his shoulders and the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. Both of them were trapped in the reality that I was no longer vulnerable. I spent the morning reviewing the evidence once more, cross-checking timestamps, photographs, and recordings. Every micro-expression, every minor slip, and every threat that had been previously dismissed now formed a coherent narrative. Each time they made a move, whether to intimidate or manipulate, I added it to the growing dossier. This was no longer a passive game, it was an ongoing capture of proof. By afternoon, I observed Evan entering the garage without permission, a glint of mischief in his eyes. I didn't intervene immediately. Instead, I documented him through the hidden camera I had installed days ago. His actions were subtle, checking the truck, moving tools, but they were enough. Enough to show ongoing intent and recklessness. I cataloged everything meticulously. Later, I overheard a conversation between Evan and my husband in the living room. Their voices were low, tense. "We need to act," Evan whispered. "She's too careful. Every step, every move she's watching." My husband responded quietly, almost pleading, "Just be patient. If we rush, we'll ruin everything." I noted their words, their tone, their attempt to manage a situation they no longer fully controlled. Each whispered plan was evidence of awareness, intent, and complicity. I updated my digital log, time-stamping every interaction. That evening, I prepared dinner, moving slowly and deliberately. I allowed them to see me, moving confidently, organizing the kitchen, checking my notes. Evan's smirk faded when he realized his usual intimidation tactics had no effect. My husband's sighs of impatience were audible. For the first time, they understood that control had shifted. I spoke quietly, more to myself than to them, as I placed dishes on the counter. "Everything is being recorded. Every word, every glance, every attempt at intimidation, it will all matter." Evan paused, frowning, sensing the weight of my observation. My husband shifted uncomfortably. Their subtle fear was a testament to the fortress of evidence I had built. Later that night, I reviewed the footage and audio from the day, ensuring that no detail had been overlooked. Every action, every expression, every word of theirs was carefully logged and annotated. The tension in the house, their frustration, and their small but telling mistakes became building blocks for the case I was assembling. By bedtime, the pressure in the household had reached a new peak. The quiet moments of normalcy had been replaced by a constant undercurrent of anxiety for them. For me, it was different. I was calm, methodical, and prepared. I had survived threats, near-death experiences, and humiliation. Now, I had the tools, the strategy, and the proof to ensure justice would follow. I cut her brake line. Evan's words echoed in my mind. Once meant to threaten, they now reminded me of everything I had survived and everything I had built. The tension had shifted. They were no longer in control. The scales had tipped. Tomorrow, I knew, the next step would be crucial. I would continue to document, observe, and prepare for the courtroom, confident that every misstep from Evan and my husband would further strengthen the truth. The night was quiet, but it held the promise of confrontation, accountability, and the slow, inevitable unraveling of their scheme. The tension in the house had reached a point where even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Evan was no longer cautious. His movements had grown erratic, his laughter brittle, his eyes darting for signs of surveillance. My husband, once the calm enabler, had begun showing cracks, quick sighs, sharp glances, and impatient gestures, revealing his frustration with the new reality. I moved deliberately, going about routine tasks to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I cooked, folded laundry, and checked my notes, but every movement was intentional. I needed to be in control when chaos erupted. Today, it seemed, that moment was near. Evan approached me first. He leaned against the counter in the kitchen, pretending casualness, but his voice was tight. "You think hiding behind cameras and lawyers will protect you?" he asked, tone low and threatening. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I don't think," I said. "I know." He scoffed, stepping closer. "You're making things worse for yourself." "It's aggravated." "I'm making sure I survive," I corrected calmly. "And that the truth survives." My husband appeared behind him, trying to mediate. His words rushed. "Frank, don't push him." "Don't speak," I said sharply. My calm authority left no room for interruption. Every gesture mattered. Every word was observed, noted, and ready for legal scrutiny. Evan's smirk faltered. You're serious." The flicker of fear in his eyes was brief but undeniable. He reached for a drawer, trying to intimidate me further, but I was ready. My hand rested on the phone, recording the scene, capturing his actions in real time. "You don't get it," I said softly. "Every move you make now is being recorded. Every word, every glance, every attempt at intimidation. And it's all evidence." He froze. My husband's jaw tightened. They had underestimated the carefulness and strategy I had employed over the past weeks. Evan's voice cracked as he stepped back. "This isn't fair." "No," I admitted. "It's not. You made it this way." For a moment, silence reigned. The house, once a place of casual cruelty, now felt like a courtroom itself. They had no authority here, not over me, not over the truth. The cameras, recordings, and documentation were impartial witnesses, silently bearing testimony to their intent and recklessness. Later, after they retreated to another room, I reviewed the footage. The subtle threats, the gestures, the words, they were all cataloged, time-stamped, and ready for presentation. The breaking point had been reached. Evan and my husband were no longer in control, and I was ready to escalate the case legally. I called Martha and detailed every action of the day. "They've made mistakes," I said. "They've crossed lines we hadn't anticipated. Every one of these actions can be documented." "Excellent," she said. "This will be pivotal. Keep recording. Every move strengthens the case." By nightfall, I felt the gravity of the moment settle over me. I had survived attempts on my life, endured humiliation, and watched betrayal unfold before my eyes. Now, the balance had shifted. The house was no longer theirs to command. It was mine, observed and documented. "I cut her brake line," Evan had said. Those words had once carried terror. Now they underscored every piece of evidence I had collected and every step I had taken to ensure justice. Tomorrow, the next stage would unfold. Formal legal actions, protective measures, and the approach of the courtroom where truth, evidence, and consequence would converge. They had reached their breaking point, and so had I. But my breaking point was one of strength, clarity, and relentless resolve. The day of the official hearing arrived with a gravity that made every step feel heavier. The courthouse loomed in the gray morning, its stone facade cold and imposing. I held my bag tightly, the documents and drives inside like armor, and followed Martha up the steps, each one measured, deliberate. The cold air bit my cheeks, but it sharpened my focus. Inside, the courtroom was alive with a tense energy I could feel in my chest. Reporters hovered at the back, officers moved purposefully, and the public seating area buzzed quietly. Evan and my husband were already there, looking composed but visibly taut, like predators suddenly aware that the trap was real. When the judge entered, everyone rose. His eyes scanned the room, then settled on us. The gravity of the moment pressed down not fear, but anticipation. This was where the truth would stand on its own, unflinching. I was called to the stand first. I swore to tell the truth and began, steadily recounting every incident: staircase, laughter, humiliation, the brake line confession, and the series of manipulations. Each detail was precise, measured, and backed by the evidence I had meticulously gathered. Photographs, timestamps, videos, and witness statements from Maria corroborated my words. Evan shifted in his seat the moment I mentioned the brake line. My husband's jaw twitched. These subtle reactions, once unnoticed, now became critical. The courtroom, once intimidating, felt almost like a stage, and I was finally the one directing the performance. The prosecutor presented the evidence in order: Maria's inspection of the truck, the staircase documentation, the audio recordings, and the surveillance footage. Each piece told the story of intent, collusion, and premeditation. The officers who had visited the house testified calmly, their words precise, reinforcing every claim I had made. Evan tried to interrupt at one point. "That's a lie!" he shouted, his voice sharp, a crack of desperation. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down," he said firmly. "We will proceed without disruption." My husband tried to interject later, suggesting exaggeration and emotional instability, but Martha countered with calm precision. "Your Honor, the evidence is factual, chronological, and verified by multiple witnesses. It is not a matter of emotion, it is a matter of law. I watched as the balance of power shifted in real time. Evan's smirk was gone, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. My husband's posture slumped slightly, the veneer of control cracking. For the first time, they were truly on trial, not just in court, but under the unflinching gaze of fact and truth. I recounted the staircase fall and the mockery that followed. I described the day Evan had entered my room, rifled through my belongings, and attempted intimidation. Each word was calm, controlled, and precise. The fear that once paralyzed me was now transformed into strategy and measured testimony. The prosecutor asked pointed questions about motive and intent. I explained clearly, detailing the financial incentives, the pattern of manipulation, and the long history of threats. I never raised my voice. I let the evidence speak louder than any emotion could. At one point, I locked eyes with Evan. His lips twitched. He tried to look defiant but failed. My husband avoided my gaze completely. I realized then that the house I had feared for so long, the very walls that had been complicit in their schemes, now loomed behind them like silent witnesses. When the session recessed, I stepped out into the hall, exhaling slowly. The tension remained, but the weight of truth felt empowering. The evidence, meticulously documented over weeks, had shifted the narrative entirely. They could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or pretend. Every action they had taken, every threat uttered, every misstep observed and recorded, had become undeniable. Martha approached, her eyes steady. "This is exactly what we needed. You've controlled the narrative, and the evidence supports you fully. We're ready for the next phase." As I walked back to the car, the courthouse behind me, I felt the first real flicker of relief in weeks. The path ahead was still tense, still uncertain, but the momentum had shifted. For the first time, justice didn't feel like a distant hope. It felt imminent. I cut her brake line. Evan's words, once meant to terrify, had become the very instruments of his undoing. The courtroom was the stage where truth, evidence, and consequence converged, and I had the upper hand. The courtroom had become a theater of truth and consequence. Every day brought new witnesses, new statements, and new evidence meticulously documented to demonstrate intent and collusion. I watched from my seat as Evan shifted nervously, unable to maintain the composure he had relied on for so long. My husband fidgeted, his silence no longer protective but revealing. Martha leaned in beside me as the judge called the session to order. "Today is crucial," she said quietly. "Every piece of evidence, every observation, every recording you collected, it's going to speak louder than words." The prosecution called their final witness, Maria, Evan's mother. She walked to the stand with calm authority and detailed the inspection of the truck, the deliberate brake line cut, and the timeline she had independently confirmed. Her testimony was precise and unflinching. She described the patterns she noticed, confirming that the events were not accidents but part of a deliberate attempt to endanger me. Evan tried to interrupt. "She's exaggerating." The judge's gavel struck firmly. "Sit down, the witness will finish." His smirk faltered. The power he had wielded over me for years was slipping away under the scrutiny of law and evidence. My husband attempted a defensive gesture, whispering to him, but the courtroom walls seemed to absorb their desperate maneuverings. I was called to testify once more, walking to the stand with steady steps. I recounted the staircase fall, the laughter, the mockery, the garage confession, and all the intimidation. I spoke slowly, deliberately, letting each word land. Every recording, photo, and timestamp was presented alongside my testimony, leaving no room for denial. "I cut her brake line," I said aloud, repeating Evan's words, not in fear, but as a declaration of truth. Those words were real, and so was the threat. The evidence will show it. The prosecution presented the recordings again, highlighting Evan's threats and the collusion of my husband. The judge leaned forward, studying the material carefully. I saw recognition in his eyes. The evidence was irrefutable. Outside, reporters whispered, cameras focused, but inside, the tension was absolute. Every breath, every shuffle of papers, every subtle reaction from Evan and my husband was being scrutinized. Their confidence was shattered. Every strategy they had counted on, intimidation, manipulation, silence, had failed. By the afternoon, the judge called for closing statements. The prosecution summarized the timeline, the evidence, and the intent. Martha concluded with precision, highlighting the deliberate danger, the pattern of harassment, and the unwavering documentation that had captured every transgression. I returned to my seat, exhausted but calm. I had survived threats, near-death experiences, mockery, and betrayal. I had transformed fear into a detailed, irrefutable chain of evidence. Today, that evidence would finally speak for itself. Evan slumped slightly, his composure gone, the weight of exposure pressing down. My husband avoided my gaze entirely. The moment of reckoning was near. The judge's gavel came down once more. This court will reconvene tomorrow for the final verdict. I exhaled slowly. Relief and anticipation mingled inside me. The storm was not yet fully over, but the scales had tipped. The evidence, the witnesses, the carefully documented truths, all of it had shifted the power. I cut her brake line. Those words, once meant to terrify, had become the foundation for justice. They had tried to destroy me, but in the courtroom the truth would not be denied. Tomorrow, the verdict would make it final, and after years of fear, betrayal, and sacrifice, I would finally be free. The day of the verdict arrived like a culmination of every moment I had endured: the fear, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the careful gathering of evidence. The courthouse was tense, each person present feeling the gravity of the moment. I sat beside Martha, hands folded, heart steady. I had survived nearly everything Evan and my husband had thrown at me, but this, the judgment of the law, was the final test. The judge entered, eyes scanning the room with authority. Everyone rose, then sat again as he took his seat. The air was electric. I focused on my breathing, the rhythm steadying my nerves. This was the moment that would define the past months, the culmination of patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Evan sat rigid, his usual smirk gone. His father mirrored his tension, eyes avoiding mine, shoulders slumping. They had been confident for so long, relying on fear and silence to control me. But the courtroom, the evidence, and the witnesses had stripped them of that false power. The judge cleared his throat. After reviewing the evidence, witness testimonies, and recorded incidents, this court finds that the actions of the defendants, Evan Mercer and Frank Carter, constitute a deliberate and premeditated attempt to endanger and intimidate the plaintiff. My breath caught. Every photo, recording, and detailed timeline I had painstakingly documented had led to this moment. I felt relief wash over me, tempered by the weight of the past months. The judge continued. Probable cause is established for criminal charges, including attempted assault, conspiracy to commit harm, and intimidation. Protective measures will remain in effect, and sentencing will proceed in accordance with the law. Evan's face paled, the color draining entirely. My husband's lips pressed into a thin line, the facade of control completely shattered. They had underestimated the power of careful observation, documentation, and strategic patience. Martha placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You documented everything. The truth is on your side." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe fully, not just to survive, but to feel that justice, long denied, was finally being restored. I thought of the staircase, the garage, the whispered threats, and the laughter that had once made me feel powerless. All of it had led to this reckoning. Outside the courthouse, I felt the cold winter air brush my cheeks. The sunlight glinted off the frost, crisp and bright. It felt like freedom. My life had been under threat, but now, the balance had shifted completely. They had tried to erase me, to intimidate and control, but the truth had endured. "I cut her brake line," Evan had said. Those words had once carried terror and menace. Now, they served as evidence, a record of wrongdoing, and a symbol of the justice that had finally been acknowledged. I walked away from the courthouse with Martha, each step lighter than the last. The ordeal was not just about survival, it was about reclaiming my life, asserting my dignity, and witnessing accountability for betrayal and deceit. The months of careful planning, documentation, and courage had borne fruit. Later, in the quiet of my new home, I reflected on the journey. Fear had been my teacher. Betrayal had sharpened my instincts, patience and strategy had been my weapons, and the law, guided by evidence, had become the ultimate safeguard. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The house that had once been a place of terror was now behind me. The men who had sought to harm me had been held accountable, and I, for the first time in months, could live without fear. Justice had been restored. My dignity and safety were intact, and the words that had haunted me, "I cut her brake line," were transformed from a threat into proof, a testament that survival and truth can triumph over malice and deceit. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. The story teaches a powerful lesson about resilience, vigilance, and the importance of evidence when facing betrayal. It shows that even in situations where trust is shattered, careful observation, patience, and strategic action can protect oneself and ensure justice. Survival is not only about enduring danger, but also about reclaiming control, documenting the truth, and letting facts speak louder than fear or intimidation. It reminds us that courage combined with foresight and persistence can turn threats into accountability.